Today, I am joined by Chris Buskirk. Chris is the founder, the editor, and publisher at American Greatness. He's an entrepreneur. He's been published in pretty much any outlet you can imagine, including the New York Times. And he is the author of the upcoming, or maybe just released, America and the Art of the Possible: Restoring National Vitality in an Age of Decay. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thanks for having me. It's you are the first media hit I am doing promoting the book. So, and I couldn't think of a better place to do it.
Oh, thank you so much. That's an honor. And I also I just saw an interview of yours maybe a month ago, and I was like, why isn't he talking about the book? Yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah, I mean, I was your podcast was probably one of the maybe the second or third podcast I ever did. Like anyone inviting me to speak about
I
whatever random
remember that.
stuff
No,
I remember.
we had a good time, and yeah, no, we had a good time doing that. And I was thinking about it when I was, this morning I was just sort of getting ready. I was thinking how we were going to do this. I was thinking, gosh, that's like probably what 2 years ago now, and now you've gone on to great heights.
Yeah, I mean, I like to believe that. I mean, it's still pretty niche right wing podcast, but still, for a niche right wing podcast, this is one of the greats. So, I wanted to ask you, because you are in Arizona, and you're a man of Arizona. You've been involved in politics in Arizona, and you've been involved in politics to the benefit of someone who's been on the podcast, Blake Masters. I just wanted to see, do you have any lessons from that campaign? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people from my audience know what happened there. I mean, he was, he's kind of a rising star, loosely affiliated with the online right, a bit more kind of a dissident energy. If anyone's watched the episode with him here, you can see why. A lot of clips from that episode have been used in kind of I don't know, negative advertising against him by opponents. It's an interesting thing, and the fact that he's a candidate that was, our guy. I wonder what what you've learned after that. Because he in the end he lost, but he was, he went down fighting. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, Blake. I don't know if you said the name, Blake Masters. He ran for Senate here in Arizona. Blake. Well, first of all, let me just stipulate, Blake is a good friend, and he would have been a massive, massive upgrade to the Senate, and to American political and public life in general. I think that he's there's basically two people that kind of epitomize what I always think of when people always say, like, why don't really smart, successful, energetic people run for office? Gosh, it's really a shame. We want to attract those people to run for office. And we had two of them running for high office. J.D. Vance, who of course won in Ohio and is now a senator, and Blake here in Arizona, who ran what is, in an environment that's harder than Ohio. Ohio's a state that Trump won by 8 points or 8.5 points. Trump narrowly lost Arizona, and so it was just a very different dynamic, especially in the general election. When you think about lessons from that election, we would have to do the 37-part Alex and Chris podcast to talk about all of the lessons learned. One of the things, though, that I think is a takeaway there is that somebody like Blake, who started out literally with zero name ID in Arizona, can win a primary for high office, and he can then do well in the general election. Losing is losing, right? I don't want to be sort of Pollyannish about that and pretend like it's something else. It's painful. It's bad for the country. It's bad for the state that Blake is in the Senate. But you take somebody like Blake, who really is uniquely good. And I guess one of the things that I learned was the positive is he can win. He won the primary by 12, and then ran a really good race in the general election and was outspent like 7-1. Okay. And that's something that people don't, I think, who maybe aren't really in the weeds on this stuff, don't really appreciate, is like, Mark Kelly, who's the senator here, there was his campaign, they had a pot of money, and then there were the outside PACs that were supporting him. They spent something on the order of like $150 million. The campaign alone was about half that, $75 million. that is a multiple of all the money that was spent on behalf of Blake, just what the campaign had. Okay, and then there were all the other tens of millions of dollars on the outside, and the money really, really matters. But I guess one of the other things that I sort of took away from this is that you have somebody like Blake, and one of the things that we saw that was super interesting, we did a final poll. It was like, I don't know, maybe 10 days before the election or something, and we had this. If you just knew the statistic, you think we were describing the Democrat, and the numbers are Blake was winning Hispanics by 9. He was winning under 45 by 2, and he was losing 65 plus by 10. Okay, now that sounds like the Democrat candidate, right? And of course, ultimately, like, it was really the older people, especially older swing voters, who kind of did Blake in. But what my hopeful read on that is that somebody like Blake, who is smart and energetic and charismatic, actually is very attractive to groups of people that Republicans have traditionally struggled with, young people and Hispanics, which are a larger group of the electorate. And I don't know. So I mean, that's just a couple of things to take away from the election. But there's a bunch to unpack there that we can learn from. And there's some stuff where it wasn't great, but there's a lot of stuff there where there's reason for, like, legitimate hope.
Yeah, I mean, he's such an interesting candidate. I mean, he's independently successful. He's entrepreneur. He's co-written a book with Peter Thiel. Like, he's a he has a profile in certain groups. I don't think, like, the uh, casual on the street Arizona voter would have heard of his name before this, for sure. But he's an established person. I mean, I knew of Blake Masters before he was in politics because I read the book and I was really into Thiel and the Thielverse. But he really does talk the talk and walk the walk, because I met him in Miami, and just the way he expresses himself, off the cuff, and he can hold a speech to a room. I'm sure this stuff is slightly rehearsed. It's not the first time he spoke, but he's got that I know extreme charisma, and
Yeah.
I can imagine that was almost enough to beat the, what you said, 7-1 advantage that Mark
Yeah,
Kelly
I
had.
mean, just insane. Like, the money really, really matters. There's a friend of mine in Arizona, retired sort of guy, been quite successful, spending his retirement as an activist, and he told me all through the late summer and early fall. I was telling him, "Gosh, we're just getting beat up on the money on Blake's side, with all the, you add up the campaign and all the groups and stuff." He's like, "I don't think it matters." He's like, "Blake is just so fantastic. Like, who wouldn't see that?" I'm like, well, you'd be surprised. A lot of people, they just don't know, or it's amazing. You spend 30 or 40 million dollars running TV ads, telling somebody that telling people who don't pay attention to politics that Blake wants to, like, push grandma off a cliff or whatever, and some percentage of those people don't know any better and they believe it.
Do you think his kind of loose association with more things that are considered more far right, or dissident right stuff, and the Kaczynski thing and all this, hurt him in a significant way? Do you think that's
The like the your audience will know this. Why? I mean, you asked him the famous question, like, what's an interesting subversive thinker? He says Ted Kaczynski, which it's a totally legitimate answer. He was a really interesting writer, and to say somebody's an interesting writer isn't to endorse sending people mail bombs. But he's an interesting writer, and they ran a bunch of ads on TV against Blake, and they would sort of take that clip, and there'd be like 2 seconds, and they'd be like, Ted Kaczynski's the Unabomber, and like, it's the implication like somehow Blake was endorsing that, which was of course absurd. Did that hurt? I don't know, maybe at the margin, sure. But it was an out of context clip that hurt worse with Blake, where he was at a public forum and they were asking him about entitlements and Social Security, and he said, in the course of his answer, he says, "Well, look, Social Security is something everybody depends on. It's got to be there for everybody who wants it and needs it. We got to make sure it's strong and is there forever," and like gives you like every caveat that you're supposed to give. He says, "But like, it's also like it pays out more than it takes in, and that's untenable. And maybe we should think about ways where part of it could be privatized. Like lift out like a clause out of a sentence, like literally like maybe 1 second, and then just wrap that into like a 30-second TV ad and say like Blake wants to kill grandma. And they spent literally tens of $millions running that ad. Did that hurt? Yeah, it did. This is one of those things that, you talk about lessons learned in general about like why people don't want to do this who are accomplished. Like you can't be, it's just blatantly dishonest because they misrepresented what he said. And I know people say, well, that's politics, and I agree, but it does also explain the question is like, why do so many politicians seem so bland? Like, why do they give these stupid answers? Now, the answer is a lot of them are not very smart and don't have anything else to say. But there's also some of them who are smart and they're like, I've got to be super careful with what I say because if I give like even a very smart 10-second answer and there is like 6 words in the middle that somebody can clip out and put into a TV ad, they will bash my brains in with it. And so it's just you just have to be really cognizant of that when you're doing like practical electoral politics. And so I don't know. Those are it's more the really big things, like some of the stuff where Blake was maybe a little more edgy, where he's talking about like things that he thinks are interesting. I actually think that was, at worst, it was maybe net neutral for him. Like for some people, that was like the attraction, like with younger people maybe, whereas maybe it turned off some older voters. And how does that net out? Maybe it's a wash.
Yeah, there's definitely energy in the space. Trump tapped into a incredible amount of energy in 2016, and he was pretty much a loose cannon. He's definitely got some memorable clips, hours of footage of him saying insane sounding things. But that in the end
There's
didn't
only one
really.
Tim Brown. There's only one Donald Trump, and that was like
It's
the
true.
people who you saw a lot of like penny ante, like dime store, like Donald Trump wannabes, right? And those people but Trump just has like, on a scale of 1 to 10, he's like a 20 on the charisma scale. Like it's charisma, like there's a negative and a positive version. A lot of people love it. It obviously turns off other people too, but it's like nobody denies that it's super powerful. And then you kind of see these other candidates who shall remain nameless because I'm too polite to say their names, but they effectively just try and do like a really cheap Donald Trump impersonation. It doesn't work, and it actually really hurts them because like, I don't know. It's like, like me going out and like trying to pretend like I'm like a professional basketball player. Like I just would look dumb doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is kind of the trouble that kind of right wing politics in the U.S. has got now, because it is post Trump. I personally don't think, and I know a lot of people in the space think that Trump coming back as Trump as the president is not going to happen. But there is really no one equivalent. There's no one with that air of Caesar to him. And Trump didn't really perform even when he was. I don't know exactly what he's learned. How do you see it playing out? Do you think Trump has a chance of coming back, or we just have to wait for someone worthy to pick
Yeah,
up the crown?
it's a multivariable. It's a multivariable equation. I don't know. Was that when you say pick up the crown? Are you talking about that Napoleon quote?
Yeah.
I saw the crown of France lying in a gutter, so I picked it up with a sword. Um, Yeah, look, Trump I think, is fully capable of it, but it's also it's not fully in his hands. Like there's a lot of other variables here. Like who are the Democrats going to run? What's the economy going to look like? Who runs against him, and how potent are they? Like I know everybody's sort of silently and not so silently thinking like, oh, like a Trump DeSantis matchup would look like a certain thing. Maybe, it could be like one of these things where they just beat each other up. It could be something where, it could also be something where once DeSantis gets out there, I don't know, maybe people don't like him as much as they do in Florida. I'm not predicting that by any means. I'm just saying, like, you don't really know until the battle is joined. So I don't know. That maybe isn't a satisfactory answer, but I think it is. I think it's more complicated as we try and predict what's going to happen over the next, like maybe 18 months or so. It's more complicated, I think, than people give it credit for right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's this podcast level speculation, so we're just kind of throwing stuff out there. I ask you because I know you're closer to the action, much closer in many ways. I obviously also want to ask you about the book. I got an advance copy. I should admit, I just read it diagonally, but it is very, very interesting, and it's kind of it lays out a vision, which is people try to lay out different visions, but I feel like this was very coherent. It's very, easy to read, very understandable, and also brings together a lot of the themes that you've covered on your podcast, and I've tried to cover on this one as well. And essentially, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up, it's you're looking for kind of maybe not a return or a resurrection or something, but a blooming of civilizational of vitality. That's kind of what you call it. What does that entail? Because people talk about vitalism a lot, and it's all about oiled up bodybuilders, and I'm sure you're not necessarily advocating that, but vitality is
Yeah,
is
I'm
a
totally
broader thing.
advocating that. Yeah.
Okay, well then that's a part of the civilization of
Yeah, no, it's
vitality.
hard, like, because physical health is part of it. And this is actually one of my frustrations with people who, on our side, broadly speaking, complain a lot about all the things that go wrong. And to be fair, I spend half of the book talking about all this stuff that has gone wrong. But that is the descriptive element of the book, which I thought was a necessary predicate for a prescriptive element of the book, which is roughly sort of the back half of the book. And you I was trying to think where to go first here, because you said something super interesting, which is like the return or the restoration. I explicitly don't believe in that and don't want to do that, because that is something that it just doesn't happen. It's backward looking. Like, what I'm trying to be is forward looking about what is, and the term you use is sort of a blossoming or a blooming of a future American civilization. Roots in the past for sure, and we want to learn from that. But the idea of like returning to, I don't know, fill in the blanks. Are we going to return to like this sort of middle class commercial republic of the 1790s or something? Or are we going to return to a Puritan state of the 1640s, or like Tidewater, Virginia of the 1680s or early 1700s? No, it's just a different. It's a different time period, and like pretending that those things are either realistic or even desirable, I think is foolish. And so that's why when I talk about civilizational vitality, there's a few concepts that I tried to use to concretize that, because like vitality sounds good. Like, I think everybody thinks, oh yeah, we should be vital, or I should personally be vital, or whatever. But until you concretize it into things that are easily identifiable and measurable, then you actually have no idea what you're supposed to do, or whether you're being successful or not. And so it just becomes sort of emotive. And so, my view on that is that there are certain things that you can actually just describe. So one of the things that a concept that I use throughout the book is like, does a civilization have a high capacity for collective action? Can you do big things as a group? Could you put a man on the moon, or look at could you conquer the western frontier of this country again, the way that we did between the 18th and the early 20th century? Like, those were really big projects that everybody participated in some way. And what is our capacity for collective action? That's I think a concept that's pretty easy to wrap your mind around. But even that is a little bit too ethereal, though more concrete than like return, RETVRN, or whatever. So then I say, like, you should just measure the other things, like, is the country prosperous? Like, I know, like, there's like this sort of cut on the right that says, well, material prosperity is not everything. Obviously, like, I'm like super Presbyterian. I agree with that. It's not everything, but it's something. And it's also easy to measure, and it is particularly important in our country, because the explicit promise of this country is that, like, that your kids do better than you, and you did better than your parents. And so there are these embedded obligations in people's expectations that living standards will rise. And when they don't rise, when they flatline or they fall, then you have not only the sort of bad stuff that comes along with like flatlining or declining living standards, but you also have like broken expectations. And so that disappointment like will then sort of play out in all kinds of antisocial, shall we say, ways. Will leak into the culture, will leak into the politics. So we want to see living standards broadly rising. You want to see people healthier, right? That's like a very big deal. When I post about this on Twitter, I'll inevitably get people will start posting like, well, we need universal health care, whatever. Like, well, and one of the points, I mean, A, no, but also B, and more important than that, is that like that's really not the main issue in American health problems. Like we have, I did a thread about this like 10 days ago or something, but like, lifespan in the United States has been declining for I don't know, 10 or 15 years. At the same, so it's now down to like just over 75 years median life expectancy. At the same time, and I was comparing to France, France's life expectancy has been increasing, right? So now it's like 80.3 or 80.5 years or something. So they've been diverging. We spend about 2.5 times more money in real dollars versus France on healthcare. Okay, so it's not the healthcare spending. And so the point I make is that like we have got all these like super cool drugs or whatever for like inflammatory disease, like heart disease or diabetes, but we also have a whole lot more heart disease and diabetes than we had 100 years ago. Like maybe we're intervening too late in the game. Like, and so I make the obvious point about seed oils and fats and things like this, but people are just unhealthy because we live in an unhealthy system. Like industrial agriculture is poisoning people. Plastics are bad for people. Like this is a bunch of stuff like online right people are very, talk about a lot. But then when you sort of dig into it, if anything, I would say like you take all of your anonymous Twitter friends who post about like linoleic acid, and you're like, you've actually understated the case against these things. And so when I talk about what is civilizational vitality means, it means not only lifespans that are increasing, but people who are healthier later in life. There's this Harvard there's this guy at Harvard who's like an evolutionary anthropologist or something. He does these studies of indigenous tribes that are fairly remote, like sub-Saharan Africa or Aboriginal Australia, these types of things. Their lifespans are roughly equivalent to American lifespans. These are people with very little contact. Not none, obviously, it's impossible to have none, but very little contact with kind of modernity, and their lifespans are roughly the same. But what's super interesting about it is that they're healthier later in life. Maybe the lifespan is like 73, 74, 75. But when they're in their 60s, they're not as sick as Americans are. And so like I always think like people are saying like, isn't it so great that you can take a pill and get your blood pressure down? But then I look at these tribes, I'm thinking like, well, their blood pressure is not up to begin with. But by the way, it's not just these Aboriginal tribes. It's like the French too. You know what I mean? Like they don't have the incidence of heart disease that we have. So, this is sort of a long way of saying, like when I talk about civilizational vitality, like if you want to actually do something about it, I think you have to define what it looks like. And so it's health, it is prosperity, it is the ability for the society to do something in a cohesive way, to agree. First of all, you have to agree on a big project that you want to do. If you want to put a man on the moon or, subdue and civilize the frontier or whatever, you have to agree that those things are good to do. And then you have to be able to do it. And at this point, I just think that, well, on the things that are measurable, like incomes of, real incomes have been pretty flat for decades. Tech innovation has really stalled for decades. Software is the obvious place where it has continued on. But elsewhere, it's been pretty slow. Health outcomes are pretty bad. And I don't know if you think that we could all, as a country, agree that it would be like the manifest destiny of the country to like go from New England to California again. Like, forget it. Like we're just not there. And that's where the kind of the back half of the book comes in to say like, okay, here are some concrete things. They won't solve everything, but maybe they're the beginning of changing the trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like in the U.S. and the U.S. being the stage where politics for everyone else, happens and then trickles down in various forms and aberrations into countries like mine. You have this perfect storm of the kind of civilizational dissolving powers of right liberals. With the idea that the only thing is you engage kind of consensually with the market, and then whatever industrial slop they want to give you. If it tastes good in a Twinkie, you should it's your freedom to go and destroy yourself single handedly, because it tastes good. You're an independent, free, freedom loving individual, and it's your right. And then you kind of have the left who's there to pick up the pieces and say, there's no one left behind from all this fallout, and the fallout is not because people are making bad choices, or that even the framework of choice itself is there's something faulty at its core, like the idea that if we make all of these ways to kill yourself available in the free market, that's there's no problem. But we need universal health care for all the people, and you need to just pump money into it. So it's kind of this really kind of self-feeding Ouroboros where these two parts just pump each other up, and they fight these shadow wars, and kind of like a puppet thing, but it's not actually a conflict. It's just one side propping up the other. So it's
Make sure the things that will kill you are cheap and abundant. Right?
Exactly. And this is not as widespread, like you said. In France, this mentality, there are other cultural hangups that prevented from taking over, because even France is slowly drifting that way. Romania. I mean, I've never seen people as fat as they are now in Romania. We had fat people, like we had one fat person in the class, and they're the butt of the joke. And maybe maybe they actually had some hormonal problems, or just they came from a more obese family or something. But now it's half the class. There are people waddling through the streets. Like there's something, some pathogen in the air, in the water, in the food, or something like that. Um, Maybe it's just a mental disease. Maybe it's just the overabundance of stuff, and the idea that you don't have to exert yourself to get your food, and it just comes to you. And we've discovered fried meats, and the fact that you can put panko crumbs on every sort of bacon strip, and then it's just maybe just the creativity of terrible food that has come through the airwaves. But it's here, and it's getting worse. It's no Walmart, but it's quite interesting that it is really slowly trickling down. And I get accused of, well, why am I interested in the U.S.? Well, the problem is the U.S. is interested in me, and it's
Yeah.
it's all here. And I don't know, how do you see that? Because I know you make reference to the wider world in your book as well. I know this is a book about America, but how do you see kind of the impact of this? How do you see the wider world maybe taking the lessons that you're laying out? And is there any sort of hope for us? What should we do here downstream from everything?
Yeah, I mean, this is there's a chapter actually. I think the chapter is called "America in the World," that addresses this exact issue. And you frame it correctly, which is like, why should I be interested in America? Well, because they're interested in you, or we're interested in you, or whatever. Um, you know, it is like a global monoculture is just bad for everybody. It's bad, and like the United States benefits in some real ways from being the sort of the exporter of the monoculture. Or I have a section in the book about the dollar being the reserve currency. I think it promotes malinvestment in the United States. We benefit from it a lot. The only reason that we can run these sort of exorbitant deficits indefinitely is because we control the world's reserve currency. And so effectively what we're doing, it's kind of like a 20th, 21st century version of mercantilism, where we extract wealth from other parts of the world via the use of the dollar. On the one hand, I can hear, people, sort of Americans thinking like, awesome, like too bad for you. The problem is it's bad for us too. And so it's like one of these things where in the short term you reap some benefits from it, but what it does is well, first of all, it promotes the government to just spend all this money because there's no check on their ability to do so, but it also promotes all kinds of malinvestment. And so one of the sort of sub themes in the book is about the tech stagnation, lack of innovation. Well, part of that is because there's malinvestment of human capital, which is incentivized by King Dollar. And the the other countries, I think it really varies. I make the point of sort of like civilization states. It's not my point originally, but I think it roughly maps onto the way the world is. It's imperfect, but you've got kind of Russia in the east, wanting to make a play as being a civilization state. You've got China and China's orbit. You've got India. You potentially have Turkey. You maybe it's not happening, but you maybe could have Brazil. But the weird thing to me has always been how willing Europe has been to just subordinate all of its interests to the United States and just be a vassal of the U.S. because it's not good for Europe either. And Europe has like this long civilizational heritage, which for whatever reason has been willing to just like give away in order to like make Uncle Sam happy and get more like cheap Chinese plastic stuff imported. I think that like necessarily has to change for the rest of the world. It's kind of like the that saying like what's can't last won't last. You just don't really know when it's going to end. But globalization has basically come to an end by force. COVID kind of broke it. It was already probably breaking anyway. It didn't. The problem is it didn't really work. Like there was a place where we had sort of extracted all of the juice from it, and then it became destructive. So like it was sort of interesting when you were like the first wave of like American manufacturers who found out you could get super cheap labor in China, like in the 70s or 80s or something. By the time China accedes to the WTO, whatever 22, 23 years ago, now everybody knows it, and now it's just a race to the bottom. And you find out that it's not just that you can like firm A can outcompete firm B because they got cheaper labor in China. It's actually you just denuded the whole country of its ability to manufacture things like antibiotics. And like that globalization wave, I think, has just come to an end. And so now you see the beginnings of what's sometimes called friendshoring or reshoring. And so you get manufacturing that's moving away from places where it only went because there was cheap labor. It's just a labor arbitrage. And so you see manufacturing slowly starting to come out of China, and maybe it doesn't go to the United States, but maybe it goes to Europe, or maybe it goes to Vietnam, which is friendlier to the U.S., or maybe it goes to Mexico or something. But it's just starting to change those supply chains, and those supply chains didn't change, overnight, and it'll take quite a while to change them again. But I think that as the kind of wave of globalization ends and that trajectory changes, then I think that probably also means that that some of these other countries or sort of nascent civilization states that they start to reassert themselves culturally just by natural processes. It's not even necessarily kind of like a belligerent act, nor should it be seen as that. But China is allowed to be China as long as they leave everybody else alone, and like Brazil or Turkey or whatever, they can do whatever they want to do. And they should, and I think they find that they're a lot better off. It goes for India or whatever. And I think they'd find that they'd be a lot better off as they develop their own cultures and think about the way they want to do things. And that the benefit that I'm most interested there is that would force the United States to stick to our own knitting, and so that we would develop our own resources, develop our own people in the United States, and stop minding everybody else's business for them.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that Europe tends to subordinate itself to the United States. I feel like people still very much underestimate just the tone setting, narrative setting, and kind of just the cultural power that's pumped out of the United States, and not even in an explicit way, but just what comes in through the airways, through your pores, you absorb the stuff because it's just out there in every form of media, in the lingua franca. This lingua franca is not British English; it's American English. This is what they speak on TV, and people just absorb it.
Mhm.
And even people say, oh, people hate America globally. You know what they hate? They hate the stereotype of the Southern hick. They hate the Bible thumping idiot. That's kind of the American stereotype they hate. It's actually been implanted by other classes of Americans who they most identify with. Maybe they look up to people in the arts, or some people, the Harvard. Everyone wants to go to Harvard, but they hate Americans. They don't hate Americans. They know the play, this morality play that we always get through TV. That there are you know people who the Americans haven't traveled. They don't know about fine cuisine, stuff like that. That they're simple, they're rich but dumb. There's all these stereotypes, and this is kind of in the water. And you see this even on a political stage. I mean, even the politicians in the West. I know people involved in politics here who are um, European members of parliament, and this is the software they're running, all of them. And this is kind of in the background. They don't know this is the software they're running, but this is what they believe. And this kind of American morality play plays out there. And the fact that Europe aligns itself to these values that exist out there in the ether, it doesn't surprise me that much. I mean, this is how it used to be. And that's kind of, I think, Nicola Soldo makes this point that there's a lot of gas left in the American tank, called the Turbo America, that comparatively, the comparative advantage of America, because of this, cultural behemoth that it is, and the fact that it's still flying under the radar because of this. People don't realize that they're running American software with everything they do.
Mhm.
It still gives it like a lot of power. How that power will play out, and where it's going to go, is still a little bit unclear. But that America is going to be a big part, is going to play a big part in the next century as well. I think he's probably right about that.
No, I think he is. I think he is right about that. Just to let you know, one of my major pet peeves about this type of thing is, and this kind of goes back to your thing about like, well, as long as we can have the cheapest foods and drinks that kill you, like we're winning. I was in the Louvre like not that long before COVID, so like 3 years ago now, or 3.5 years ago. And if you go in the Louvre, you go down that escalator because the lobby is one level underground. So you're coming down the escalator. I'm going down the escalator to where you go and show your ticket and go in. And I don't know, I'm just like halfway down the escalator. I look up, and across the lobby is what? A massive Starbucks. I'm like, well, pardon my language, but like, what the fuck is a Starbucks doing in the Louvre? Because what, the French don't make good coffee? The French don't make actually way better coffee than Starbucks, which is horrible, acidic, and too hot. Like, why is that there? Like, it's in like the preeminent monument to French culture, and the first thing you see as you're riding down the escalator is a Starbucks. Like, I was sort of like, my second thought on that was like, this is like 30 years later. Like 30 years ago, they would have been a McDonald's. Now it's a Starbucks. But the point is still the same. Is like, why, if you are the people who run the Louvre, an institution of the French government, what made you think it was a good idea to put a Starbucks there? Like basically, have you no pride? Like, there's no French coffee company that would rent that space. And I think, like you did this. I don't think it's just the money. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's the software you talk about. It's like, aha, like that's the American thing. That's like I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't ever think about it this way, but it's like Starbucks cool, or like, well, I don't know what it is, but like
Yeah.
something made them make that decision to say, like, we've got great French coffee. Like, the French make good coffee. No, to hell with that. Let's put a Starbucks like right in the middle of our cultural temple.
Yeah, interestingly, I think, like for example, I always come up with this thing like in Romania, the word for mascara is Rimmel, and the word for tennis shoes or whatever sneakers is Adidas, and all these brands have become synonymous with the product category. And I feel like coffee, Starbucks and coffee kind of have that effect. Like Starbucks is coffee, so maybe it's just the coffee thing for any, because they have guests where people go there, less so the French, but more so Japanese Americans, people who come to see it, and they want to go to a place that screams coffee. and Starbucks is it.
I
They
don't
probably
know.
also made an offer they couldn't refuse. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've got a friend who lives in Paris. He was telling me this was a while ago, but I found this instructive and hopeful, which is that we're talking about food and the way agriculture is practiced in Europe in general, but in France specifically, and kind of the impact this has on health and obesity and these sorts of things. And we're talking about the way chicken is like factory produced in the United States. Like it's vile, it's unhealthy. As an American football coach once said, it's a nervous Asian bird, and he didn't want his players eating it, which was like, you should look that up on the internet. It's very funny. It's like it makes the rounds like once a year as a meme. Um, but I brought this point up, and like you go, like if you're from the United States, if you go to France or you go to other places in Europe, like meat tastes different than American beef, because it's because of it's not just because of the species, but it's because of the way it's raised. And I said, well, it must be great. Like, French are their famous for like coq au vin or whatever, and chicken's really good versus like American factory chicken. He says, well, it's funny. He says, in France, we actually do have the exact same type of chicken production as you have in the United States, like with a Tyson's chicken or whatever. He says, the difference is that it's illegal to sell it in France. It's produced exclusively for export to China. Whereas the chicken that is produced according to like most of the sort of what you think of as like the French agricultural laws, that's what they sell to their own people, and that's what those people eat. But like the sort of American version of like factory chicken, it's not legal to sell that in France, but you can export all you want to China. So I don't
yeah.
know. Is that France subtly waging war on China?
Maybe waging economic war as well.
Yeah,
It's nice. It's
right.
nice to sell to China. I mean, good for them.
I just
Um,
always thought that was so funny. I'm like, yeah, we'll make it, but hell no, we're not eating that shit.
yeah, I think that was the case as well for like a lot of GMO stuff that
Yeah.
was produced in some countries, but they would just sell it to the U.S. But if you're already planting GMO and on your fields, I feel like that defeats the purpose. You're kind of messing up already. But
Yeah,
that's there.
no, you're 100% right. Like you can't like if field A is planted with GMOs, field B will be infected with GMOs just because of wind and rain and erosion and whatever.
Yeah, there's so much strange regulation now, and we've had our own very like lax regulation in Romania, and then you have European regulation on top of that. And European agriculture regulation is a completely other beast because there's so many subsidies, and which countries get subsidies, which countries don't get subsidies. Now Romania gets subsidies as well, so that's kind of thrown all of our agriculture out of whack. And to be honest, in Romania, I think the European regulations made the food a little bit better because we kind of had like very organic food because we had barely had manure type fertilizer for a very long time. Not very efficient. It wasn't like Norman Borlaug's here agricultural explosion. We didn't have that. Then obviously you had the farm shops open, so there'd be a little kind of like a little shop of wonders in every little village where you had Monsanto products, Roundup, all sorts of Roundup ready seeds, all the stuff. And people loved it because, it protected your crops. The farmers would just love that stuff because it works. And then they went a little bit overboard. So you'd have, for example, if you went to the village and people make wine, from their own vineyards and stuff, it would be almost undrinkable because it would be packed with so many sulfites from the magic shop. And because, they didn't have like, high stainless steel, pressure systems to keep the wine from oxidizing and stuff like that. They just, pour in a whole bag of sulfites, whatever, it's great. But you can barely taste it. So and now you have European regulation, and that kind of, brought us up a little bit just because Europeans, they fought their way through these standards a little bit through a longer term, and they've learned a little bit. But yeah, the U.S. is a completely different beast there because yeah, you're free to choose Tyson's chicken, I guess.
Well, it's not even just free to choose. It's like it's ubiquitous. Like you have to go out of your way if you want something else. It has been. I mean, one hopeful thing is that it has been sort of, and this has happened organically, no pun intended, but there has been this sort of a little bit of like maybe a mini renaissance, or maybe the very beginning of a little bit of a renaissance in like actual sustainable farming. And like regenerative type farming, and that's been very good. So now you you have to go out of your way to find it, but it's actually literally just some like 5 minutes on Google, and like you could have it delivered to your door. And if you're, I would say, I don't know, like I live in Phoenix, which is not, Arizona is not known as like a booming agricultural capital. It's desert, but we do have agriculture in Arizona, and there's like a very good grass-fed cattle association in Arizona now. Like their practices, like even somebody who's a pain in the neck about this type of thing, like I am, with full OCD, like you can look at what they do. It's quite good, and the beef they produce is quite good, and it's now easily available. But it's still like a tiny percentage of what is being produced. And like if you want to go out to eat or you go to a restaurant, like that's still sort of nearly impossible to get. But my sense is, I don't know, maybe it's just a boutique desire, and therefore will remain like sort of a cottage industry, or maybe there is a way in which we sort of decide to get serious about like getting rid of industrial agriculture and getting back to some sort of a basis in regenerative ag, which produces healthier food and therefore healthier outcomes.
You know what's interesting because kind of I'm going to use this word again. People make fun of me using this word, but downstream from all the Instagram psyops that we get is also a movement in kind of the same. I mean, this is very boutique in Romania, kind of this regenerative agriculture. Grass fed beef. People haven't. They've just started eating beef like 5 years ago, and now it has to be grass fed because there are influencers who like people really didn't used to eat beef here. All the cows were milk cows. It was all stringy and stuff. But now you got your Angus, you got your Charolais beef, and you can order it from a farm. And now I really like that. The fact that it's the fact that there's a lot of terrible stuff coming down the pipes for us. All the essentially every mind virus that you have in the U.S. But also this, which is really interesting because I just put in an order at a chicken farm, and it was very specific what they're fed, and the fact that they're let outside to have an omnivorous diet. Because if you go to a store, a supermarket, and you want to buy the most healthiest chicken that they have, the most expensive bit of chicken, it's the corn-fed one, which is orange. It just says
Yeah.
100% corn-fed vegetarian chicken, and I'm like, it's the chicken was vegetarian. It's confusing to me, but yeah. Anyway, and it's like bright orange, and I'm like, this. I don't understand
Like, no,
exactly
no.
what you're selling here. Yeah. So there's layers to it, but yeah, it's coming here as well, and I think that's, I don't know, hopeful to me in some ways. But yeah, very very boutique at the moment.
Yeah. But still, I mean, this is like sort of the point of just right now in my life, Alex, everything comes back to the book. So I'm going to make the book point again. But I think the trajectory is really important. Like this type of stuff didn't exist or barely existed, I don't know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And now it exists and it's growing. And like, that's a good thing. Now it's kind of like you were talking about earlier. I can remember as well when we were recording or not, but you had read Peter Thiel's book with Blake, 0 to 1. Like I feel like we in that type of thing we've gone from 0 to 1. Now we have to go 1 to n, right? So that now it's a matter of trying to scale those things and try and really change the incentive structure. Part of which is financial, but part of which is also legal, right? You've got all these like government incentives for doing industrial agriculture. Those things were all put in place in the 70s intentionally by a Republican Secretary of Agriculture, by the way. And now, like, it makes it really difficult to do the sort of agriculture we're talking about at scale because of the incentives that are in place from the government.
Yeah, and realigning those incentives would involve the presence of a value hierarchy that is completely different to the one that we have now, or the one that you have now, but indirectly we have as well. So I think that's probably the key question for everyone, on the right, and how do our values trickle into the institutions? Will it have to be a completely separate set of institutions? Where would those reside? Where is the legitimacy? Where's the power there? That's kind of that's the question, I guess, that everyone's asking. I mean, I know you addressed it a little bit in the book, but if you could go a bit into that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that one of the proposals that I put forward is, I think that the ability for people in this country to experiment with different solutions is really important. And it is possible, by the way, that those solutions that what do I want to say? That different solutions will be acceptable or good in different parts of the country, right? But I mean, New York may think that it's good to do a particular type of policy one way, and Texas might think it's good to do it in a different way, another way. And it turns out that both of those things are perfectly fine, and just let the New Yorkers do New York stuff and the Texans do Texas stuff. But the hard part of the lift there is creating an environment in which that sort of independence and experimentation is permitted. So I propose in the book what is effectively like charter cities. Not my idea, but what I do take it a step further. And for people who are not into this, basically, a charter city is just a de novo city. Which, first of all, I think the act of building new cities is always and everywhere a sign of some type of vitality in a civilization. Like, it's not easy to do. It inspires people to do things that they otherwise couldn't do because you've got a blank slate, and so now all kinds of things become possible. There's all kinds of challenges that come along with it. Some that are seen, many that are unforeseen, and so it requires innovation. But what we want to do is create a legal framework in which these cities can exist with at least 1 foot outside of the existing frameworks, so that they just have a lot more ability to experiment with different sorts of outcomes. And I offer 2 examples of what might be, one's a historical example, and one is actually a present U.S. example of how that rubric, the legal rubric, might work. And there's a good framework for this. In the Holy Roman Empire, there were all these free cities. There were, I don't know, like 150 free cities or something. And basically they existed within the empire. They had to pay their taxes to the empire, though they had a different tax regime. They got many of the sort of national defense type benefits and obligations of being a part of the empire. But other than that, they were very independent. And these often became cities that were very prosperous trading cities, whether regionally or within the whole empire. So that sort of concept seems pretty interesting to me. And I think it may or may not be a good idea. I haven't quite settled on this. It may or may not be a good idea to allow existing cities to adopt that sort of format or legal format. I tend to think it probably would be. Like, what if New York or Chicago said, like, we want to adopt this program? And so that might lead to a renaissance in those places. But what I definitely think would be good is if people were permitted to build brand new cities. The other analog here is Puerto Rico, actually. Like, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and it exists as a part of the United States, but it has substantially more independence than the states do. And I know people who want Puerto Rico to be a state think that that's a bad thing for Puerto Rico. I actually think it's a very good thing for Puerto Rico. Like, Puerto Rico has like the national defense commitment of the United States. It has access to all American markets. People who live in Puerto Rico are American citizens, and with all of those sort of rights and protections that comes along with. But for instance, the federal tax rate in Puerto Rico is a fraction of what it is onshore. There's much less regulation in Puerto Rico than there is onshore. And so what people have just really been waking up to is that Puerto Rico actually is actually this haven for people who want to do certain types of innovation while still remaining within the United States. Like, the same thing applies, by the way, I think in some ways to Washington, D.C., though to a lesser extent. Like, people think, oh my gosh, like they don't have a representative in Congress, like they're second-class citizens. Actually, if the government of Washington, D.C. was smart, D.C. is a slightly different example because it's the seat of the national government, but there is a world in which, like, D.C. could be like the Hong Kong of the United States, or Puerto Rico could be the Hong Kong of the United States, where it's sort of this, it exists in this gray area that actually is very beneficial for all parties. And so that's one of my proposals, is to try and like take, really think through this and intent and make, sort of an intentional political move towards allowing these type of structures. Again, it's sort of like a get away from the homogenization. Like I think that this type of experimentation could actually wind up being quite good, both within that one discrete situation, if there was a new city built or whatever, but also it also winds up giving more purpose to the society, as at large, and hopefully sparks more dynamism.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why the kind of the gray goo drifting tendency of the left would oppose this type of, essentially, your it's kind of extreme freedom of assembly. And people have entry and exit rights, but the charter city charter decides the parameters and values that are accepted or not acceptable in the charter city, I guess. And then
Right.
you'd have kind of this strict Brazilification of societies. And I mean, it sounds great to me, but I could see why the left might fight you on that one.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, but I think that there is a certain subset of the left that maybe would find this attractive, because remember, it cuts both ways. Like if you want to take an enclave and have a charter city that is like super woke, okay, go ahead and do it. And that's sort of like my New York, Texas example, or maybe it's like should be a San Francisco or Northern California, Texas contrast or whatever. But like if there could be a charter city for that type of thing too, and so to the extent that and maybe the conflict really um, is that on the political left, like they actually want to rule everything. Like
Yes,
they
that
want
was
to
my
tell you,
next comment. Yeah.
yeah, right, and this is where these sorts of things, where they really get some friction, if you will, is that like the left believes that they know what's good for everybody at all times in all places, and it's like this totalizing force, um, and that is what do I want to say? That like that's where you potentially get a conflict here. My thought, though, on that is that like something like a charter city, and I do say this explicitly in the book, something like a charter city or like a so-called free city, like in the Holy Roman Empire, if you kind of adopt something like the Puerto Rico system elsewhere, um, it is not a way to like sort of win the total war. It's just a way to change the trajectory. Like it's like I'm explicit in the book. Like I don't think any of the things I propose there solve all the problems. I think that they maybe are the beginning of solutions. Like I think we're pretty far from total solutions, but we've got to do something that's really concrete. And so this is like why federalism was and could again be important, because people and we see this in the states now, where you have this sort of physical separation, where certain types of people from California left and went to Texas, and certain types of people from Texas left and went to New York. And I think it's important to have these institutions, where you have real infrastructure that's built where people can physically exist. Like you have these spheres that are virtual on Twitter or wherever. People have to live someplace, and people want to be around like-minded people. It's good to have these sort of virtual spaces, but I was talking to somebody last week who lives in Chicago. He's lived there almost his entire life, has a successful business there. He's like, I'm leaving. Like, I just can't do it anymore. Like, the people around me are it's just untenable. And that's why I think start trying to build up infrastructure like this, so that people have like a physical space where they are around people that are hopefully like-minded, or at least not at openly at odds with them, is like super important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm always a little bit suspicious of people who have totalizing, ready-made, and instantly applicable solution to all of our problems. So I think it's more than reasonable that that's not what you're selling, and that it's not managed decline, but we are in a bit of a downward turn as a civilization, and things need to be managed. The next generations need to be managed. We need to make sure that people are still having babies. We need to make sure that they can feed themselves, and that they won't be persecuted for their beliefs. That religion's still something that people can practice. So yeah, there's a lot in the book, people, and I really do recommend that you buy it. And before I let you go, I want to ask you the question of the show. The tricky question of the show, that gets some people in hot water. I think maybe, or maybe not. Um, the subversive thinker question. You have a recommendation for our audience?
I do have one. I think it's a pretty good answer too, if I do say so myself. And
Okay.
here's one of the challenges with your question, is that like all the subversive thinkers are taken, right? It's
We've been
like
doing this show a while.
right, there are like no hot takes left. It's like you could say like Kaczynski or Nietzsche, or like I don't want to give the Sunday school answer and say Jesus, or like I don't know, whoever, BAP, or all these things. Like it's like too obvious. But I actually have what I think is an answer is good because it's true. So my subversive thinker is John Hughes, the American writer and director who made like most of the classic 80s movies. So he made like a bunch of the vacation movies. He made Home Alone. He made Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 16 Candles. And he is like, I was thinking about this question, like he is a subversive thinker today because he's abnormally normal. Like he just told the story of the last time America really worked. And like just literally just watching like Home Alone or Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Vacation, it is like that in 2023 America, like that is a subversive worldview where you have a country that works, that is cohesive, is low crime. There are families that live together, like each other. They have kids. They're just like abnormally normal, and it's like it is. They say like the past is a foreign country. Like if you want to go abroad, just watch a John Hughes movie.
That's uplifting and total black pill. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, those movies were the world that we looked up to. I mean, we got to see Home Alone in the 90s, and we thought, man, this is coming. Get ready, guys. This is flights, people flying on vacation, you're flying, you have so many children, they're so prosperous that you even forget one. It's just absurd. So like it was an interesting era to watch. So yeah, very, very good recommendation. I like it.
Last comment on that, Alex, is the Home Alone house. So the family in Home Alone was supposed to basically be kind of middle class or upper middle class or whatever, but they were not in any way portrayed as being rich, right? I think they had like 6 kids or something, 5 or 6 kids in the family. It was basically just suburban Chicago, like I think that movie came out 1990 or something. So, but basically, it's an 80s movie. That house sold, and I happened to see it online. I actually Googled for it, but it sold, and there was news stories about that house, which was middle class family, nice middle class American family in Chicago, sold for like $5.5 million before the COVID run up in housing prices. And I found that pretty striking, which is that like the picture of middle class normalcy presented 30 years ago is actually super expensive.
Yeah, I mean, even the idea that each child has his own room and you have 6. How
Yeah.
does that work? Yeah, a lot of space dividers. It's like a cubicle situation there.
Right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
I
This was
appreciate it.
lovely. I'm happy that we got to do this, and I'm very grateful for the chance you gave me 2 years ago and have me on your podcast. And I'm glad that kind of slowly turned me onto the format, and now here we are, and I get to interview you. I want to point people towards America and the Art of the Possible: Restoring National Vitality in the Age of Decay by Chris Buskirk. Please buy it. You will not be disappointed. And please do follow Chris online at Chris Buskirk.
At the Chris Buskirk.
at the Chris Buskirk,
Yeah.
of course, and at American Greatness. And thank you again, Chris.
Thanks a lot. This was fun.